we are being sold the promise of AI agents. That promise comes with enormous responsibility to understand what happens when we offload the critical thinking of whatever we're building to a machine. Because the machine is not doing critical thinking. And unlike other software, it's not deterministic. So it's not like you can say, every single time this request comes in, the AI will do the same thing. It doesn't.
Yeah.
It will do the same thing most of the time, and then sometimes it'll do something slightly off, and sometimes it'll do something extraordinarily different.
Yeah.
And building these systems then requires you to build in all the gates to say, like, if this particular weird thing happens, then don't do it. But that means you have to account for every possible weird thing that could possibly happen, which is impossible. Or you have to say only these types of responses are allowed, in which case you're confining the AI system down to a point where you're basically just writing software.
Exactly.
And then you should just write software. Or you have to put a human in the room and make sure the human is actually doing the work.
Hey there, welcome back and welcome to Season 3, a very new season in the podcast, full of surprises and new guests. My guest today is Morten Rand-Hendriksen, one of the clearest voices on tech, ethics and AI in the world, author of multiple AI and tech courses on LinkedIn Learning as a principal staff instructor at LinkedIn. In this conversation, we unpack the hype and the harm behind AI agents, why startups are building on dangerous ground, why language models are being misused, the hidden risks of outsourcing decision-making to machines that don't understand context, the future of content creation, the ridiculous state of the current business models, and much more. Whether you're a founder, a business leader, a product mind, or just AI curious, this one will make you pause and rethink. Welcome, and without further ado, Morten Rand-Hendriksen. This episode is brought to you by Gnist. At Gnist, they're passionate about helping their customers build digital products and services that create value for users, businesses, and society. They help you with the tools and practices you need, whether you are a developer, product lead, tech lead, or a business leader. Gnist strongly believes in the power of people and cross-functional collaboration in order to create tomorrow's digital solution. They are Norway's leading boutique consultancy in product and technology leadership, transformation, and change.
All right, Morten, we are live. It's so good to see you again. How are you doing?
I'm doing quite well. How about you?
I'm doing good as well. It's late evening here and it is morning for you, I guess, in Vancouver?
Yes, my work is just starting. So I have tasks piling up while I'm chatting with you.
Okay. Well, let's hope it doesn't pile too much after the chat.
Oh, no.
We'll see. We'll see. Okay, Morten, so you are a principal staff instructor at LinkedIn, responsible for course creation, innovation, and public outreach on all things tech, including artificial intelligence. And for those who are listening to this conversation, please go and watch many of the courses Morten has put out on LinkedIn Learning on AI, and it's fantastic stuff. You really should dig into Morten's work. And today, Mr. Morten, we're going to talk a lot about AI agents, ethics, which I know is a topic you're passionate about, and a bit of the future of AI and what are the things that product people, designers, and founders and business leaders should know about. So it's going to be maybe a little bit all over the place, some practical stuff, some more philosophical stuff. We'll see where the conversation takes us. Sounds good?
Yes.
Super. All right, let's dive into with a broad question straight away. We are a bit at the beginning of a golden age for builders, or the beginning of a dangerous bubble. What do you think?
Yes, I think.
Yeah.
The AI boom is bringing about an enormous new opportunity space for a lot of things. And whenever there is opportunity space, there are ways of exploring them that will bring utility and benefit in the long term, and ways of exploring them that bring short-term value but long-term don't make any sense. And what we're seeing is the industry often pursuing the short-term goals and not really thinking about the long-term effects, while some are thinking more long-term. And that's why I'm saying it's both, because we have a sort of a gold rush type situation with AI where everyone is seeing that if you put the letters A and I onto anything, then more money appears.
Yeah.
Right? And the result of that is people just either put AI into things where it shouldn't be, or even just say they are using AI and then shoehorn some AI chat thing into an app that doesn't need chat, or do something. And you also have people who try to replace humans with AI because it appears cheaper. And then on the other side of that, you have people who look at these tools and materials and look at what are they actually useful for? Like, what is the true utility in them right now? And how can we integrate that into our existing products or services to improve them? And what I've found is you see two things. You see, one is that the ones that take, especially language models, because that's when we talk about AI, we're talking about language models, which is actually like this much of a gigantic space that's called AI. We're like, so this little thing that's called language models, if you just look at them and you see how people are using them, the ones that are the most successful at it are the ones that treat them as interfaces. So a natural language interface between the human user and some complex computing system, where what you're doing is replacing the human work of being an input device to a computer with AI. Because if you think about it, a lot of the work we do with computers is actually putting information into the computer in the right place, and then making sure that the computer is doing the right things with information, and then validating that the information that comes out is what we were looking for to begin with. And that requires a high level of understanding of either programming languages or an application like Excel or Tableau or Power BI or something like that, where what you really want is the ability to say, I have this data, I need it to conform to this standard, make it so. And language models can do that, not because they are doing the work, but because they can translate our natural language statements into programmatic instructions and then plug into software that can do it. And I think this is where in the enterprise where people are trying to incorporate AI into their products, what we're starting to see is this realization that you can't get language models to do the human analysis work that our business relies on, because that requires a contextual understanding and historical understanding that simply is not replicable in a computer. But you can use AI to help take away a bunch of the grudge work for the employees so that they have more time to actually think about the data or think about the design or think about the product instead of just making it work properly, right?
Yeah, so then we get into situations where perhaps where the hype comes in, where we talk about agents, basically, where agents are supposed to take decision-making responsibility and accountability, and back to what you mentioned, it is interesting to understand what decision-making actually is.
Yes.
And double-clicking on that, because decision-making means accountability. Decision-making means that you are able to take several different types of information, including body language and so on, to then take an informed decision. And if that decision is outsourced to agents, where these agents are supposed to take those decisions on our behalf, then who's accountable?
Yeah. This is like an 8-hour conversation or a 2-week university program or something. I think I was at a conference last year where there were a bunch of leading AI developers and like the people who are building the AI tools, right? So they're not the developers of the AI systems that were on stage discussing what AI agents and what they call agentic AI means for the world. And one of them said something really important that really didn't get much attention, which was the blast radius of an AI agent is infinite. And what he meant was, if you give a machine the capability of doing something, that could be like firing off a function or filling out a form or performing an action, like input comes in, the AI agent makes some sort of analysis and then performs an action as a result. The moment you do that, whatever power you give it, whatever capability you give it, will be used, and it'll be very hard to control that it's always using it correctly.
Yeah.
And for these agents to be useful, they need to have a very high level of capabilities to do things, because you're basically trying to say, instead of me clicking on 18 buttons in an interface, I want the AI to click on 18 buttons in the interface. So that means that it needs to be able to do that. But because language models don't work like traditional software, where you have to say, like, when this, then click this button, and then the software will do that every single time. There's never a chance that it'll do something else. It's just because it's a logic chain, right? With an AI, it'll perform some sort of what's called inference, which is basically like generating a bunch of new language, and then it'll use that language as an instruction. And while in most cases it'll say, when this, click on that button, there's also a chance that it'll say something else, or like misform a sentence, and then accidentally say, click something else or do something else, and then you get this side effect. And there's a high likelihood that that side effect won't be noticed because there's no one sitting there watching.
Exactly.
And if you listen closely to the language that's coming out, especially from Microsoft, and I have to like put all the disclaimers on here. Like, I work for LinkedIn. LinkedIn is owned by Microsoft. I am not speaking on behalf of either company. I am voicing my own opinions. They do not belong to my son or his pet pig or my wife or the company I work for, anyone. This is just my educational analysis of situations. So if you listen closely to what the AI people at Microsoft are saying, they are using the term human in the loop a lot. Because it's becoming very, very clear that you cannot ship an agent out without exactly what you said, which is accountability. Someone needs to be held responsible for whatever action the AI agent performs. And that means someone has to sit there and do it or watch it do it. And in most cases, the correct solution is actually to build a system that says, here's a bunch of suggestions. I am going to follow this algorithm, do these things, yes, no. And then the user says, click yes, or can even go in and say, yes, 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 no, yes, 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 no. And the place you can see this in action right now is in coding assistance. So GitHub Copilot has an agent, and Cursor has an agent, and a bunch of these other things have agents. When you activate the agent, you can have like your huge project, and you can say, refactor the whole thing, or add this new feature, or do whatever, right? And you can watch the AI like write a bunch of text and then write a bunch of code and do a bunch of things in your code. And then you get buttons. So you get a button that says accept all, where you just click it and everything that it just did happens. So that means make new files, delete files, change code, do whatever. Or you can go in and look, it'll flag every single file it touched and every single change it made. And you can go in individually and look at each piece and say yes, no to each of them. Because that way you can actually review what is going on. And that brings up the second half of the blast radius, because the second half of the blast radius is us.
Yeah.
Have you ever driven an electric car that has like lane assist and cruise control?
You're asking me?
So that, so that it's like you just push a button and then the car is like following the car in front, staying in the lane, doing all the things. We have one of those cars. And it's extremely helpful because, then the car is, staying the proper distance away from the car in front and everything. But if something very strange happens, like someone suddenly cuts in front of you, the car like panics and tries to fix it, and you panic and try to fix it, and then you get a confluence of activity. But over time, what happens is you get habituated to the car doing this work for you. So I borrowed my mother-in-law's car to go for a ride somewhere. And she also has an electric car. And I didn't realize that in her car, it doesn't do that distance thing with the car in front unless you explicitly click a button. So when you turn on the cruise control and the lane assist and everything, it doesn't turn on the radar because it's an older car. So I was on the highway and I turned on the cruise control and I set it to 100 kilometers an hour, which is the speed limit. And the car just started going very fast, like directly towards the car in front. And it took me like a moment to realize the car's not going to stop. It's just going to ram right into the car in front of me. I have to stop the car and then slam on the brakes because I become habituated to the assumption that the machine is doing the right thing.
Exactly.
And that if something happens, like everything will shake and flash and then something happens, right? That happens a lot, where when you have a system that is doing your work for you and it's doing the work correctly most of the time, you become habituated to trusting the system. And then you'll start being like, yeah, oversight, whatever, click, accept. And then suddenly you've accepted a bunch of decisions, or you've made a bunch of decisions, but they were made by proxy. And then there's a weird outcome, and you have to go back and figure out where the hell did that weird outcome come from? And it might be like 15, 17 steps ago. And some weird decision the AI made, or it's not a decision, but like some determination the AI made based on a misunderstanding or a misphrasing of something inside its own quote unquote reasoning, right? So as we are being sold the promise of AI agents, that promise comes with enormous responsibility to understand what happens when we offload the critical thinking of whatever we're building to a machine. Because the machine is not doing critical thinking. And unlike other software, it's not deterministic. So it's not like you can say, every single time this request comes in, the AI will do the same thing. It doesn't. It will do the same thing most of the time, and then sometimes it'll do something slightly off, and sometimes it'll do something extraordinarily different. And building these systems then requires you to build in all the gates to say, like, if this particular weird thing happens, then don't do it. But that means you have to account for every possible weird thing that could possibly happen, which is impossible. Or you have to say only these types of responses are allowed, in which case you're confining the AI system down to a point where you're basically just writing software. And then you should just write software. Or you have to put a human in the room and make sure the human is actually doing the work. And like, it sounds like I'm not droning on and on, but like my brain is running as I'm talking. Have you, like, in Japan, they have this policy where if you watch videos of the train conductors in Japan, you know, the super fast trains that are like, you stand on the station and they go, and they're like, what was that, right? So these train conductors, if you watch videos of them on YouTube, you'll see that every time they do something inside the cab, they do this. They point at it and then they do it. And they point at the screen and then they do something. And they point at the button and then they push it. The act of actively pointing at it before you do it forces you to think about what you're doing before you're doing it. And it's this weird thing that, like, why would that happen? It's because the pointing doesn't do anything. So it makes your brain go, I pointed, but I still have to do the thing, right? So it takes you out of the automated behavior because it's two like separate things where one of them has no consequence. We kind of need that when we work with agents. Some interrupter that steps in and says, you're about to accept 15 different things here, right? You're rewriting your entire code base. You are booking a trip to Spain and a ferry ride on a specific day that does not correspond to your hotel bookings because of some weird thing. And your flight leaves at 2:00 in the morning. And like, you need to be aware of what the system is doing and be reminded that you can't trust it because the system doesn't know the context you're operating in and can never know the context.
Yeah, this is like, there's a mix of incentives as you talked about, because so one comment, by the way, just a fun fact on your comment on habituation, so I really like that. I was reading Factfulness the other day, and he was writing about a team of Swedes researchers that went to India, and they went to an hospital in India, and the elevator was suddenly closing, and one of the researchers kind of came in to rush into the elevator, and the doors kept closing. and locked on her leg.
Yeah.
And the Indian kind of the medical director or whoever, he was like, "Are you crazy?" It was a big moment, and she was injured, and the habituation that we have sensors, in more developed kind of hospitals, or it's just we take that technology for granted these days. If you're in Europe, for example, all of a sudden you go to a different country, and all of a sudden the elevator doors just close, and back to your habituation point of the dangers, in this case physical danger, but in some agentic AI cases, maybe not physical danger, but other types of dangers. And I wanted to talk with you about this incentive landscape that you mentioned, because VCs that are funding AI agent startups, and even the companies running them or building these agents, they're of course incentivized for speed. They're incentivized for building more, and they are incentivized for fully automation at some point. So meaning no human in the loop, I would assume. I mean, this whole hype of agentic force coming in and taking over some of your actions. How does this conflict with us ensuring that whatever gets built is as ethical as possible?
There's the push to pour AI liberally over everything so that it'll somehow make everything faster and better and cheaper is pure chokehold capitalism. Right? It has no relation to anything that has to do with people, and everything to do with how do you make more money for shareholders. To hell with the human beings who get harmed in the process, right? Because the incentive model of any big company is earn more money. That's the incentive model, because they need to pay their shareholders, and the more money the shareholders predict the company will earn in the future, the more money they're willing to spend on buying more shares, and value goes up, right? And it's actually really interesting to watch, because if you just take like the macroeconomic perspective, when you look at tech companies, and you notice how like tech companies, they have sudden massive layoffs all the time. And it's very odd, because you often see like this tech company, like Google, has like the highest earnings ever, and then they lay off 3% of the workforce. And you're like, why are they doing that? That doesn't make any sense. What you're seeing is, at some point the previous year, they looked at the earning curve of the company, and then they saw the earning curve looks like this, right? And then they say, okay, if we just extrapolate, it'll continue like this. And then in reality, it continued like that.
Yeah, so
there's like a 2% difference. But because the projection was unreasonably high, because they should have noticed that it went like this and should be like that, right? Because the projection was wrong, people were buying stock on the assumption of the projection being a certain value. It wasn't. So even though the company earned a ton of money, and even more money than they earned last year, it wasn't matching the projection, and therefore the shareholder value goes down. And then the easiest way for the company to show that they are responding to shareholders is by like doing cost-cutting measures. And the easiest way to do that is to cut like 3% of the workforce and then rehire them like a year later. It has nothing to do with product. It has nothing to do with the value the product produces. It's just money. And the AI is like dropping into this atmosphere where what really happened, when someone sits down and writes the history of our time around AI, it's probably going to go something like this. There was this company that was called OpenAI that did a lot of interesting research around language, that released an experimental research project to the public in November 2022 called ChatGPT, with the intent of seeing how people would chat with a language model. Due to the news landscape around that time, which was in November, so there wasn't much happening, a lot of journalists just fell into it and started playing around with it and wrote a lot of hyperbolic articles about it, which resulted in millions and millions of people downloading the app, which resulted in even more news coverage, which resulted in the company basically being incapable of providing the service, at which point a bunch of other companies went, hey, we're going to help you. We're going to give you a lot of money to build this. A lot of money was infused into it. And then someone said, how do we make this money back? At that point, the research project, which was just a chat app, became a product. And everyone started thinking, how do you make the product make money? And the default for making money is always, how can we replace people? Because people are expensive, because they have like need for food and sleep and shelter, and they have rights, right? Inconvenient for making money. So if we can replace them with machines, then we don't have that problem anymore. Or if we can replace expensive humans who are well-trained with machines that do the advanced work, and then the humans are just like sitting there and doing oversight, then there's money to be saved. So we started seeing this shoehorning of AI into everything. And it's really weird because we're still just talking about language models that mimic what our language looks like and produces more language. That there's utility in language models, but the utility is not in reasoning or doing things. It's in transforming language into other language. And they do a great job at that, but that's not what it's being presented as. And that leads to then, college students being incapable of writing because they've gotten used to running everything through ChatGPT. On high school students being uncomfortable sending text messages to people without first running them through ChatGPT because they don't feel like their personal writing style is as good as it needs to be. And any internet search for best product of any category leads to 50,000 articles that are clearly written by AI that are just summarizing the same content over and over again. And although the human reviewers exist, you'll never find them because they're being drowned out in AI slop, right? You were asking about the ethics. There are so many ethical problems with this, but I think that if you boil it down all the way to the bottom, the biggest problem that we're having right now is that we have bought into this notion that is pushed by these so-called capitalists that human work is a waste of money, right? That any human work that can be replaced is a good. And the reality is people who have work, who are doing things they care about and are using their work, using their time in a way that is meaningful to them, have much greater value to society than a machine doing that work and that person sitting at home. Not only because a populace of active people who are engaging with the world is beneficial to all of us because we get to meet each other and talk, but also because people who work have the financial power to contribute back to the financial system and contribute back to society and be part of the driving force that helps society grow, right? But when we start talking about replacing people with machines, we're really talking about taking people out of society and putting them on the sideline so that someone else some billionaire can grow their massive wealth that they don't spend on anything or just use to skew political elections in other countries, right?
Yeah, I find this so interesting. Like this whole topic, especially you mentioned like content creation and how we are using AI now for pretending to be the author of our quote unquote, article or post. And man, like it's the internet is flooded, as you mentioned, with AI generated content, as if it's a human writing it, which I think is bizarre. Because if you look into the whole incentive of doing that, is what at the at the core is dopamine rush. To publish something that you believe it's yours and you get praise or whatever. I just think that the whole thing is so interesting at the biological level, almost. If you know what I mean? Like it's bizarre.
So we made a mistake. We made a couple of mistakes, but one of the big mistakes we made in the early days of the web was not figuring out a way of remunerating people who were publishing content on the web properly, right? And the reason that happened was likely because when the web was first created, it was created as a distribution mechanism for academic research, right? It was Tim Berners-Lee and his colleagues trying to figure out how can we use this internet thing of connected computers to distribute research in a way that is queryable and linkable and internally linkable, so that instead of crating up and sending giant boxes of paper around the world to share research, we can just put it on the internet and we can have research happen much faster. Once people started publishing content on the web, especially newspapers and other like revenue streams, they just translated their methodology for earning money to the web. So like when you publish a newspaper, the way you earn money is through subscriptions and advertising, but there were no subscription models on the internet, so then advertising, right? So they plastered their websites with advertising. Then companies were like, hey, we can just be an ad agency for websites. So they started adding ads. And then we figured out, like, how do you measure whether or not an ad is successful? Well, you can do click-through or you can do impressions. And if you do click-through, the user is leaving a note in the server, right, saying that they were on this page looking at this thing. Then Google got involved with text link ads. They noticed that they had all this metadata. Then they started using the metadata to target ads. Then someone was like, hey, we can actually sell this metadata. They created surveillance capitalism. Surveillance capitalism became the thing that drives the internet economy. And now we're in a situation where if you go to YouTube or TikTok, there are two algorithms running. There's the advertising algorithm, whose only job it is to raise as much revenue as possible. And then there's the content recommendation algorithm, whose only job it is to get people to watch as much content as possible, so they are exposed to as many ads as possible, so the ad algorithm makes as much money as possible, right? Yeah. When you have that, where at no point, like, the recommendation algorithm's purpose isn't to give you the best possible content, it's to give you the content you will engage with the longest, so that you get exposed to as many ads as possible. Then you get the problem of like online radicalization through social media, because the social media algorithm is just for forwarding whatever content enrages you the most, right? And then puts you in an echo chamber so that you keep engaging. And you get this thing that happens to creators, which is people start out being creators trying to make really good quality content. Then they find their niche and they realize that if I just keep making content in this little box here, it earns me more money than when I do these other things. So I'm just going to do that. And then they get really tired of doing that. And then they go, oh, hey, there's an AI tool that can just like endlessly generate content on my behalf, because it doesn't matter what's in the content. All that matters is that the content exists and gets surfaced for long enough to me to get paid. So that means on TikTok, you need someone to watch a video for 10 seconds or 15 seconds to earn money. So all you need is for the content to be engaging enough for someone to stick around until you get paid, and then you don't care. So the incentive model, like the lack of building an incentive model around quality that the people who built the web 20, 30 years ago, didn't do that work. So now the incentive model is purely attention. And AI like steps in here and says, you can use these tools to just endlessly create attention, creating content. And then we just end up with AIs talking to AIs, and humans are just sitting there observing what is happening and being inundated with content, right?
It's so bizarre, the whole thing, seriously. I actually think, I don't know what you think about this, but I actually think print might have a comeback, because people will be inundated with these things. And what's going to cut through the noise is authenticity and your ability to know that it's truly authentic.
Yeah.
And so you can do that if you post video content, for example, because then you know that at least it's not, well, at least today. But then, if you look at print, like for example, if you're reading an article at Harvard Business Review or The Guardian or whatever, there's a certain expectation that it's not AI created. There is an expectation. Whereas if you're reading...
For now,
right? Whereas if you're reading Bob's newsletter or following a random person on LinkedIn, I'm not so sure anymore, and it easy to detect, but if you're
Sometimes.
really good, if you're really good, it kind of isn't. So
Yeah.
I might think that if this goes overboard completely, you know, and becomes even more bizarre and more people start using this in a very evident way, the whole algorithm on LinkedIn will be, you know, screwed, and there might be a comeback of more, or people might be screaming for authenticity and credibility, and you can get that through print in a way.
Yeah. I think you're definitely onto something. So currently there is, across all social media, and in particular on TikTok, this really noticeable pushback against inauthentic content.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it's not just like about AI, it's also about people generally shun content that is very clearly from a brand, right? Which is why like creator advertising is so popular, because if you know, rugs are us, or water pistol company number 3 has a channel, the only thing people do on that channel is complain about the product.
Yeah.
Every time they see something, they're like, oh yeah, the thing I bought from you was garbage. It didn't work. Give me my money back, right?
Yeah.
But if a creator is like, I have this thing and I love it, then they'll engage with it because it feels authentic. And then in some cases, they'll see through it and be like, this is nonsense. In other cases, they will actually believe it, because some creators only post content about things they actually believe in, right, and actually use. And so there's pushback in that. And then there's also pushback against this this fake content, and even content that is very clearly like trying to hit a specific audience. So I think over time, we'll see the audience is starting to split between the people who are passive consumers, who are very happy, like who feel comfortable consuming this generated content because what they want is consistency and a sense of like normalcy in all the chaos of the world. And it's very safe for them to like pick this predefined channel where I get to hear only what I want to hear, right? And that's where you get some levels of online radicalization happening. And then on the other side, you will have people who only want authentic content. Yeah. And the creators who target them will have to work really hard to prove that what they're doing is authentic. And it's funny because you say it's easy to detect. So I have a very particular writing style. And it's partly because I'm Norwegian and I learned English in an academic scenario, and I wrote my university papers in English. So I have this like archaic philosophy way of talking and writing. And also because I'm neurodivergent and like obsessed with language, so I often use I'm very particular about how to get language to be precise. And language has mechanisms for making it precise, but that's not how people talk, right? So when I write messages in Teams or in chat or email, people are like, oh, look, like it's a Morten message. But then what's happened recently is sometimes I'll say something and people are like, did ChatGPT generate that? And I'm like, no, that's just how I talk. And they have to sit back and be like, oh yeah, you do talk like that. And I've heard this from other people too. Like neurodivergent people often experience that the things they write gets flagged by AI detecting systems as AI generated because their language is very complex.
Interesting.
And the type of like overtly complex language that these AI systems will use, because the AI systems are trained on academic papers and journalism, right? So you get this like weird thing where people in the real world start doubting actual people because they are being exposed to the discourse around whether or not something is real or not. And then on the other side, you have people who are doubting real content because it doesn't fit with their paradigm, like their belief system about the world. And we're now in a situation where, depending on where you are on the internet, you can kind of choose your own reality and then just write off anything that doesn't fit with that reality as AI generated. And it gives, people with bad intentions a carte blanche to just rewrite history to fit their narrative, which is something that's happening right now on the thing that formerly had a logo that was a blue bird, right? Like the whole platform is just a radicalization platform now, and is full of AI content that is like demonstrably ridiculous, but people believe it as true. So there will be a pushback from consumers. I think also a lot of companies who are not directly invested in some specific like world-changing project will start actively filtering out some of this content because it's not good for them. Not only because users shun it, but also because the SEO people are starting to like build machines to target the algorithms. And you will quickly end up in a situation where you have like an AI creating content to trigger the algorithm so that the advertising works a certain way. And then the advertising numbers become like they no longer match up. But like you spend this much money on advertising, but very few people are actually buying anything because the people that are consuming the ads are machines and they're not doing anything with it. So the buyers stop buying. So it's sort of a reverse self-enforcing system, right? Where the system may end up suppressing some of this content on its own.
Exactly. So. There's going to be so many disruptions in existing business models right now.
We need better business models about content. Like, I have this, like, I'm trying to write an article about this that is called, "What the fuck is monetization?" Because if you actually think about the concept of monetization, right? You go, I have a video. I want to monetize the video. What does that mean? You're not selling it. So what you're saying is you're trying to somehow make the video, somehow make money, but not by selling it or exchanging your work for anything, but passively through some external means. Like this concept of like you have to monetize your content is a problem of we have no way of getting paid for our work. So we have to somehow make the content work. And then you get this, if you can make the content monetize itself, then it becomes passive. So then you can have passive income so you don't need to work. And if you can get a machine to make the content that monetizes itself, right? So the problem is monetization, but the monetization is a consequence of a lack of the society valuing the work that goes into making things.
Yeah, dude, this is so interesting. Let's move on into a slightly different topic, but still connected to this monetization topic, but still opening another Pandora box to evolve the conversation into something else. You talked about OpenAI, and now you talked about monetization. And of course, there is a centralization of power right now in foundational models. And many people say that the opportunity for new businesses related to AI is in the application layer. So semiconductors, first layer, foundational models, and then all the way up to application layer. But you talked about monetization, so here's a question for you. Is there a risk that new founders or companies building AI products on top of, for example, OpenAI, what's the risk with such a decision with building their products on OpenAI, and are they onto a price squeeze in the future depending on OpenAI's decision? And what are the alternatives, like open source? And like let's talk a little bit about those two differences for the founders and builders listening to this conversation.
Yeah, so first of all, don't build products that extend other people's products, because the bigger company will just, if you're successful, they'll just build your product into theirs and then your business goes away. This is true in all industries. Like I used to be heavily involved in WordPress and other open source projects. Anytime someone built an advanced enough plugin or extension, that plugin or extension would get baked into the core application. And then all the work you did to build the product just became meaningless because it disappeared. Like it became something no one needs because it's just there. When OpenAI had its first dev day that wasn't last year, it was 2023. It was interesting. So I was at that conference, and the day before I was at a founders dinner where there were like people who were starting up new businesses. And I went around and asked everyone, like, what are you building? And they were all telling me types of things they were building and how much money they were getting for it. Like, I got a $10 million investment to build this translation thing that would take a PDF and translate it into another language and allow you to chat with it in another language. Or I'm making a GPT that can do X, Y, Z, right? And then the next day, OpenAI announced a bunch of new features. And I was sitting there next to my friend, and we were like listing off all the companies that were in the room the night before that were killed in that moment. It was like all these ideas are now dead because all of these things are now core features. And then when OpenAI announced their GPT store, there were a bunch of people like, "Ooh, this is a business opportunity because now I can like build and sell GPTs." But if you go look at it, what actually happens is that's the company saying, "Hey, we want to have you do all the work of figuring out what people want, and then we will take whatever works well and just make it a core feature." So you might earn money temporarily, but you won't earn money for a long time. And so this is important to understand for any person who starts a business that is around AI in some way, that you need to consider whether or not what you're doing is extending the existing functionality of the tool, or whether we're using the tool to do something else that isn't just an AI feature, right? Because if you're building an AI feature, you are putting yourself at risk of, first of all, everyone copying you, and second of all, the company or the core service consuming you.
Even though you have a moat of, for example, very specialized data, because this is a little bit of a debate.
There's no moat.
You're nodding. So this is a little bit of a debate. Some people believe that the value is in sort of, like SaaS hyper verticalization. You get to collect lots of really specialized data, and that's your moat for your AI product. Blah blah blah. That's the argument. Disagree?
Yeah, and then someone just distills whatever you're doing and makes the model out of it, right? Like DeepSeek did with OpenAI, and then, right? No. Like DeepSeek very, very, very firmly showed that the two moats that people thought were there, which is like one is compute power, and the second one is the availability of data, are both not real, because DeepSeek was able to build rival models to OpenAI using way less powerful systems by scraping data off the internet in a way that, while if you want to make a very complex argument about it, could be said to be like unethical, is not any more or less unethical than what the companies that were scraping are already doing to everyone else, right? And are already doing to their own products. Because that's just how you build smaller models, is you take output from the bigger model and you train a smaller model on it. This is like the standard method. I mean, OpenAI even has a distillation system in their API to do exactly this, right? So there will be, I think, like to your original question, I think what will happen now is we're getting to a point of ubiquity with models where every big company has a model that is like somewhere around the same level. And while like some are technically better on some metric, the reality is the vast majority of users will not it makes no difference to them, right? If you take Mistral's best model and you chat with it to do some trivial task, and you take OpenAI's best model and chat with it and do some trivial task, or DeepSeek's model, or Meta's model, or whatever, they do the same thing, right? So to you as a user, the only thing that matters is availability, how easy it is to use, and how much it costs. And that results in everyone driving the price down. As new models come online, more and more companies are coming online, more and more of it is open so that other people can basically take what was done and just replicate it and do something else and make a custom model out of it. It'll be very hard for these big companies to stay at the top. And it will be easier for other companies to come in and pick a niche market and target that niche market. See Mistral's Le Chat, which was released 2 weeks ago, and is like targeting the French language market. It speaks English too, but like they are very much like, use the French one because it's better, and it works. Like they have an enormous amount of downloads. It's so on that application front, it'll be harder and harder for these big companies to win. And what they're doing is saying, we have some competitive advantage, like we're on the verge of making AGI, or we're doing like better research than everyone else. But then they all do the same thing, right? at the founder level, at the business level, at the product level, the big lesson here is you need to come up with a good idea that is important in the real world, and then see if AI can help you do it.
Yeah.
If you start out by saying, we're going to use AI to X, it's not going to work. Like, it's not going to be successful long term, because you are not, that is not a business idea. That is a, I want to use technology idea, right? I've consulted with 15 companies in the last 2 weeks, startups. All of them started out with, I want to use AI to, and then insert field, insert goal, right? And all of their ideas were half-baked, because all they were thinking about was like, how can I utilize AI in some way that is interesting? But they had never thought about the service design.
Yeah.
They had never actually gone out and said, am I solving a real world problem? Do I actually know anything about the industry I'm trying to disrupt here? Do I understand the actual user need? Am I addressing something that isn't already solved or can be solved in a different way? And it was only one of the companies that actually had made a pivot, where they had an original, like, they have an original business that exists already. And they were like, we're going to use AI to do this thing.
Yeah.
And then they had gone out to their customers and said, hey, if we build this, will you use it? And the customers were like, what? No. Why would we use this? This makes no sense. And then they realized, oh, that doesn't work. But it's because they were thinking about putting some of the back-end work in the hands of the customer. And what they realized is the need that they identified was like complex data processing. Definitely could benefit from using AI. But the person doing it is not the customer. It has to be the people inside the walls, like in the company. So they pivoted to focusing their AI efforts on helping the staff instead of helping the customer. So it's standard product design, right? You start by saying, I see a real world problem and I have an idea for how to solve it, and I'm going to build a product to solve it because this is the right way to do it. And then you go, which parts of this problem can be automated? And are there points in that automation chain where we can offload the automation to an AI or put a natural language interface in place of someone sitting there like hacking in code or putting in data or something? That's where the success is. Because now you're in the real world building real products instead of just saying, I want to use AI because AI is the cool thing right now.
So what would you say to one of those founders that would tell you, yeah, Morten, you know what? Yes, there is a real problem. We have found the problem. We have validated the problem. And we have found a solution that is AI powered, that is desirable, feasible, viable, usable. What should we do next? What would your advice be in a way?
Build it and then use your AI iteration to identify how, like, the problems you're having, and then try to see how much of it you can wedge away from the AI again. Because what I've found is when companies try to, like, AI can be a really good disruptor for a company. I like to think of it almost like a provocation, right? In that you say, we have this entrenched problem where it's like, we need to move data between these two things and we can't figure it out, or there's some sort of novel problem that requires a lot of human work. And the reason why it requires a lot of human work is because it's not clear how you would automate it. Or it requires like some level of understanding of what's going on at a specific point where a human has to actually look at it. Or the data has to move from one form to another form and they don't conform. So you have to like do a human level translation between them, something like that, right? When you start putting AI into it, it is a door that opens up to realizing maybe the reason why we have this problem is because it was originally designed to work for humans. Like the data processing or whatever it is. It was originally designed with a human in mind, as in a human has to do this work. And because a human looking at a screen will see these two correlate, we're going to put them next to another in the database. But once you say, when you try to use the AI to do the work, you'll discover the AI can't do it because your database is full of junk, or your Excel spreadsheets are full of layout elements, or there's something else. And if you then redesign your data structure to make it more like a data structure, then you can not only plug AI into it, but you can plug APIs into it. And then you can actually build automation systems around it that don't need AI. And then you put the AI only where you need it, right? So you can actually use it as a wedge to start rethinking how you are doing things. You start with AI and you end up maybe with 20% AI and 80% rebuild of your data, of your automation tools. And then you use AI where it matters, because the AI processes at any scale are enormously expensive, not only in paying the vendor, but also in energy and all these other things. And I think that we should very, seriously justify every kilowatt we use on AI.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to just burn tokens. And there was a thread on some social media a couple of weeks ago. I wish I saved it. I think I'll be able to find it again if I go looking. There was a guy who was saying that they had put an AI agent into their tool chain for shipping their product, right? So every time they made a code update, they have like a huge automation process that takes your code, the human written code, and crunches it down and optimizes it and then puts it out. And they put an AI tool in there to do some check. And then all of a sudden, their bill for an error checking service, a third-party error checking service, shot up like 7,000%.
Right.
But when they looked at the code, there's nothing wrong. So why are we paying? Because you pay per error that gets logged.
Right.
And suddenly there were like 7,000% more errors being logged, but there were no errors in the software. And they went in and they tried to figure out where it was. And they looked at their code, couldn't see it. Looked at their optimization chain, couldn't find it. And then they looked at the actual shipped code, which is like unreadable, crunched down code, right? And then they decompiled it out again. And they were like, wait a second. It's logging a bunch of things. And what it was doing was the AI had flagged all these points where the user may make an error in their process. And because the system is logging all errors, it's logical that you would also log the user errors. So every time a user would leave the shopping cart or take a product out of the shopping cart, an error is fired off, because it is technically an error, right? Like they are altering the data or not completing a loop. So the AI, having no understanding of the world,
exactly, doesn't have context,
correctly flagged the code as error states, and then was like, well, you forgot to add the logging to it, right? And that ended up costing the company like millions of dollars.
Interesting, fascinating.
Because the agent did something that doesn't make any sense, and they put it in at a point in the tool chain where no one could see what it was doing because it was at the end of the tool chain, right? So you have this type of issue all the time. And we will see more of them as we hand off responsibility to these things. And because they are not accountable and don't understand anything, but use language that makes it sound as if they do, it'll be very hard for developers to go and say, we're not going to do this, because even though it looks like it knows what it's doing, it doesn't. And it'll be even harder when developers more and more buy into the notion that actually they do understand things and they can reason and they are actually sentient beings, and we should really give them human rights because we might harm them, right? Like these are all real conversations that are happening.
They are.
So,
Yeah, it's interesting. Morten, unfortunately we are ran
way
out of
over time.
Yeah, we are over time.
I should have warned you.
But no, this was amazing. We need to do a second edition at some point. Morten, this was amazing. Really, really appreciate you taking the time.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah, please.
I am not doomy about the future. I believe in people. I think that once we realize that AIs are not tools to replace us, but tools we can use to do things, and once people start taking control of the language they use, so that we're not describing machines as people, but instead describing them as machines, we can build more livable futures for the human race and for everyone else on the planet. The key is we have to remember that the thing that matters is the people. It's not the money. It's not the big corporations. It's not that someone else will build a better model. The only thing that matters for a product is you saw the world, you saw how to make it better, and then you tried to build a product to make it better for people. right? That's your focus. And if you do that right, it'll take longer. It'll take longer to be rich, but you will do something that is far more valuable than just becoming rich. You'll actually be changing someone else's life for the better. That's the work of product development. That's why Lego is so successful. It's not because they're like an evil billionaire corporation. It's because they make awesome toys that everyone gets joy out of and learns from, right?
Well said. Morten, thank you so much. Where can people find you?
Easiest place is on LinkedIn. I have a long, complicated name, which makes me easy to find, right? If you search for Morten Rand-Hendriksen, that's the only one. You can also go to lnkd.in/mor10, so more10. Then you get to all of my LinkedIn learning courses. And from there, you can click on the link that goes to my LinkedIn page. That's where I do most of my work. I'm also on TikTok at Morten Web, and I'm on Blue Sky under my website name, which is more10.com, so mor10.com. The guy who has the handle Morten, like Morten, is a journalist in Norway who does not like being asked tech questions. And we've had some interactions. Like he's a cool guy. It's just funny because he's like, why are people asking me these like extremely complicated questions about APIs? I don't know what an API is.
Oh, that's funny. All right, we'll add it then on the show notes. Morten, thanks so much, man.
Thank you.
All right, that was it for today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Make sure you subscribe to my newsletter so you don't miss out, and see you next time.